Welcome to the Gracewriters Podcast, Christian writers changing popular culture. Hit subscribe on your favourite podcast player so you never miss an episode. And find show notes, useful links and a full transcript at gracewriters.com. Today on the podcast, award-winning non-fiction author Lisa Boucher. I'm Belinda Pollard. I'm an author, editor and writing coach with a theology degree and 20 years in the publishing industry. I blog for writers at smallbluedog.com, and you can find links to all my blogs, books and online courses at belindapollard.com.
Hi, I'm Alison Young. I'm a former early childhood teacher living in Southeast Queensland. I have 4 adult children and I write romance under the pen name Alison Joy. You can find all my information at alisonjoywriter.com.
Hi, I'm Donita Bundy. For the past 20 years, I've been using my theology degree to underpin my preaching and more recently to inspire my urban fantasy series, Armour of Light. You can find out more about that, me and all my other projects at donitabundy.com, DONITABUNDY.
After years of training polo horses and working as a flight attendant, hairdresser and bartender, Lisa Boucher reconstructed her life and settled in as a registered nurse. For the past 27 years, she's worked with hundreds of women to help them overcome alcoholism, live better lives and become better parents. The award-winning author of 6 books, she is the mother of twin sons and lives in Ohio with her husband. Welcome, Lisa.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
It is great to have you join us on the podcast today. And we were wondering, before we kick off with the other questions, would you mind letting the listeners get to know you a little bit better by undergoing the rapid fire 5?
Go for it.
Lisa, who is your target audience?
Probably women and Christian.
Okay. And what is your main genre?
Self-help.
When is your optimum time for writing?
The morning, early.
And do you have a favorite place to write?
Right where I'm sitting. I have a glitch. It seems I can't work unless I'm sitting at my desk.
And how did you get into writing in the first place?
It was a God story. Literally, very quickly, I had just graduated nursing school. I'm cleaning up. I got home from work. I'm cleaning up the kitchen and I heard a voice. Now I want you to write a book. And that was 1994.
Wow. Sorry.
So, Lisa, your first 2 books were novels and they were published within a few months of each other. What was the writing and publishing process like for you?
Well, I had no idea what I was doing. So for my first book, truly, I feel like I was telling Mariana, a friend, I said, I feel like the first 4 books taught me how to write. I found my voice. So it was a lot of mistakes and errors. And I know went to writers' conferences and all those things that writers like to do. And everybody has certain ways, but they would say, do an outline. I never did outlines. And for fiction, that worked very well, except for one of the books is such a mess because I didn't do an outline and it's in the computer and I still love the story, but it's a mess. So I'd have to go back and literally dissect it and rewrite it. So it was much different, though, with the nonfiction that I think for Raising the Bottom, I knew the subject of alcoholism so well, having grown up with an alcoholic mother, then getting into my own addiction. That book was not hard to write. And then I also interviewed 10 women for the back of it because I wanted other voices beside mine. So that was probably the hardest part, was to keep their voice authentic to them and not change it too much. And then with my most recent book, it's a little different too, but I wanted to focus on the prayer of Jehoshaphat, and I wanted to focus on bite-sized pieces instead of something that was going to be, people have had a lot of anxiety lately. So I wanted something a little lighter. So that process was just when thoughts came. I had notes all over in my car, in the kitchen, wherever I was, and I would jot down these thoughts like, oh, I want that in there. And then I compiled it later.
So you've gone from writing fiction books to what would you call self-help books. You've now Raising the Bottom, as you've already mentioned, deals with alcoholism, and it's quite a change in direction for you. What actually prompted that book?
Well, raising the bottom was my mother had passed in 2011. And when she used to call me, because she finally found recovery after this horrendous slide down to, demoralization for 25 years. So she would call though, and was in recovery, and she'd say, well, what are you working on? Because I was always writing something, and it was always fiction. And she said, why don't you write about women and alcohol? And I said, well, there's so many avenues that I could go down, and I really just couldn't grab onto one that could, make the thesis for a book. So I didn't do it. And then she passed away, and maybe a year or two later, literally, I woke up one day and it was just in my head, and I went, that's it. And I knew I wanted to focus on women, and that you don't have to hit these low, horrendous bottoms. I mean, I didn't even really have a bottom. Nobody thought I had a drinking problem. And I just could see in my own life that the progression was there. It was escalating. So I chose to nip it in the bud and get some help before it got, like, I think I would have had that 15, 20 years of drama that people associate with alcoholism, but I saved myself that 20 years of complete drama.
How did you find the actual process? Was it because I'm assuming part of that is your mother's story in that?
Well, it was. So that process was very emotional. I didn't think it would be. I wrote, like, early in the book is a lot of it's not a memoir, but there are some childhood memories and things. And I remember writing that, and I'm laughing, and then I'm crying, and then I'm sitting there going, I cannot believe that I'm, like, not completely Looney Tune, because this is craziness, like what it was like. And so that was very hard, those first few chapters, to write my mother's story. And then it was another God wink that my sister was in rehab. I mean, the whole family is just this big alcoholic mess, especially the women, it seems, not my father. But my sister was in rehab, and someone took her to Youngstown. She was in Cleveland. She went like 3 hours. There was this CD of my mother's voice telling her story. So for that, I wanted it in the book after that was found. And I thought it was just so unbelievable that my mother has now passed away. And so that was very emotional. But I transcribed that for her story because I wanted her story in the book. So that was very emotional. And then the rest of it, because I am a nurse and I have that background and that piece, and marrying all of the experiences that I saw working in emergency rooms and psych wards has been my two main areas. There was a lot of just my own experience that, I didn't do a lot of scientific. I didn't want it to be scientific and heavy, but I was able to offer a lot, I feel, in what I saw and what reality was coming through the hospital doors. And so that, those kinds of chapters were not that hard to write because I went on experience, really, of what I had been through and seeing it for 20 years. So I feel like my nursing career, 20 years of it, at least went by before I wrote that book. So I had a lot of material just in the back of my mind of what I was seeing, over years. We start to see patterns. And so I wanted to include those patterns that just could not be denied.
Did you end up outlining those parts of those books, or were they written more organically as well?
Most of it was organic, but there were a few chapters. I did have to play with the chapters and did a lot of moving them around and things like that. And then when my editor got involved after the point where it was enough to send it to her, we, I think, moved some more again and decided that, and that's when I wanted the women's 10 stories in the back, because I wanted to give you the bulk of information about what is alcoholism, what does it look like in everyday people, because, my mother was a nurse, a mom of 4 children. She was married to a businessman. Very normal, picture. And then there was this other side of her that was just like a monster, that it was unbelievable how it was taking over her life. And it started for her with prescription drugs from a doctor. So these are the things that I wanted to portray, because I think it speaks to millions of people. I know there's a lot of people that go to work and they come home and they drink and they think this is normal, but they're losing. I always say this, I think about the brilliance we're losing, because I know the women that I've worked with that have gotten sober, they've all gone on to become writers or painters, or they go back to school and get, theology degrees like some of you have, and they do really wonderful things where they start giving back to society. So I wanted to portray, like, this is what it looks like early. It doesn't, like I said, I've got doctors and nurses and moms in the book. It was kind of funny because I said, no one will ever want to go to the hospital again. I didn't realize I had so many medical people. Because there was a huge problem in the medical profession. Doctors, average population is 10%. Doctors are 14%. Possibly because of their stress level. And I can tell you from my own experience, I've yet to work on a nursing unit where we didn't have a nurse literally in the throes of addiction. And nobody seems to be able to recognize it. And it shows up as poor attendance, poor judgment, things like that can be very dangerous. If you're working in a high acuity area, like when I was in the emergency room, it was a level 1 trauma center. So we were getting the helicopters coming in and we were getting some really serious trauma. So you cannot be compromised under the influence or hungover and make good, quick, sound decisions. So it's a problem.
What was your publishing process? Were you able to find someone who wanted to publish the books for you, or are you self-published?
The first 4 were, I just threw them up kind of on Amazon and really didn't do anything with them. Like I said, I don't know that I was really wanting, I don't know what I was wanting out of it. I think I needed to learn to write, and I didn't know a better way, because at every conference I go to, they said you learn to write by writing and reading. And so that's what I did. I read a lot and I kept writing, and I do think I found my voice. And these last 2, it's a hybrid publisher, and it's worked great, because I did learn with the first 3, it doesn't matter who publishes your book, you need distribution. And so I have traditional distribution.
So do you think you'll go back and write more novels, or do you think it's going to be more self-help books now?
Well, I don't know. I do know Jesus, Mo, and Cheese Puffs that I wrote. It's a darling story. And I did get a lot of people that wanted me to write a sequel because they fell in love with the characters, Mo and Flo. They're this adorable old couple. And just, if you can picture white bread and mayonnaise, I mean, that's Mo and Flo. And she's addicted to cheese puffs. She's got to have them. So that was just a really sweet book. And I don't know, maybe I have another book in mind that's in the vein of what this last one, Pray, Trust, Ride, that another one that I'm thinking that's a little shorter. I wanted to do it again around one of the prayers from the Bible kind of thing. And I wanted to tackle issues of waiting and suffering. Not very upbeat, but the joy that comes after it, though, that, I think because we are such an instantaneous society, right? Everybody wants everything yesterday, and that's just not how it works. And that's not how God works. And that's been my biggest spiritual struggle in my writing. It's been, I don't know if it's been a writing journey or a spiritual journey. And that's probably going to be a book someday when I figure that out, because I feel that very strongly, that there's been some really maddening times. And there were 3 years where I walked away from writing. I was just sick of it. I'm like, I don't have time for this. I'm raising my twins. And I told God, I'm just done with this. Really, I'm done. And I didn't write for 3 years. And then it pulled me back. And after 6 books, I guess I'm a writer. I feel like I've earned the title, you know, I mean.
I think some people write for a purpose and a season at a particular time in their life, and other people are just always coming back to it, and they're just writers to the core.
It's who they
Even
are.
though there are times when they can't write or don't write, or life is just too hectic. And I think there's just all these different ways to write, isn't there? And it's interesting how you talked about everybody says you've got to use an outline. Well, no, you don't have to use an outline.
Right. I stopped going to conferences because I always felt like they were telling me I was doing it wrong. And I'm left-handed too. So I don't have an analytical bone in my brain or neural pathway in my brain. And all of that outlining in that is just exhausting to me. It's just not fun. I can't do it. So I do better just doing it organically. And, like I said, some maybe a very faint outline, but I think it stifles it. I tried that, especially when I was writing fiction, because that was half the fun. Like characters would pop up that wanted to be born. And I'd like, oh, I love that. I'm going to keep them and I'm going to kill that one. And I just really enjoyed the whole process of that, of being surprised of where. But then the downfall is I do have a 300-page book that is such a hot mess.
You may want to resurrect that manuscript. You may want to pull it out again. And can I tell you, if it's a hot mess, one of the best things you can do with it, if you've got a laser printer at home, or you can go to a local office supply store, is get it printed out and then start laying the pieces out somewhere and look at it that way. That can help you to find how you want to make those pieces move together. There's so many people wanting to make rules for how other people should write. And I think we need to just get off each other's back and just explore. I'm similar to you, Lisa. I would find like the idea of writing a detailed outline for a novel takes all the joy out of it. For me, everybody's different though. Some people find that beautiful and perfect and clarifying. So, I write kind of a mixture. I have an arc in my head of where we're heading and I write crime. So it's who's going to be alive at the end and who did what. But some of them surprise me along the way. And then I'm kind of forward outlining as I go for just the next few scenes maybe a little bit further on. And that it works for me. We're all different. I found it also really interesting the way you talked about how some of the emotions affected you while writing, because that can be a really strong thing. There is a thing called narrative therapy, and it's a real thing. As people write, emotions happen, stuff gets worked through. And I think it's also valuable for the grace writers out there to hear you talking about that, Lisa, because some of them are finding themselves surprisingly emotionally moved or tangled by what they're writing, whether they're writing fiction and it somehow echoes back to things that happened to them, or whether they're writing about real life and their own experiences or other experiences that resonate with them. I've done some work with a domestic violence charity, and when the writers in those anthologies are putting their stories together, the charity is really rigorous about making sure they have psychological support as they work through it, because going back into those times, it's your brain, your mind and your heart are back in those times, even though you've moved on from certain things. So it's a really good issue that you raised there. Would you have felt that when you worked through some of those difficult things in your writing, did you feel any sense of healing or resolution from coming out the other end, or is it still much the same?
No, I think, because I did think about this whole thing, I don't know that I could have written Raising the Bottom 5 years prior. I think I had to get I was so much more detached from all of it now as an adult, and had worked through so much of it on my own through my own recovery. So I was at a place where I was, I guess, taken aback by how it did. I didn't think I was going to react the way I did when I was writing. And like I said, there were scenes where I'm laughing, and other scenes, the tears were just pouring. I'm like, oh my God, how did we survive this? So it was that kind of thing that it's like, wow, this was difficult on all of, just not me, but my siblings and my mother. She died with 30 years of sobriety, but I don't think she ever forgave herself. And that was heartbreaking. And that's probably needs to be visited in, a book or a chapter or a page, because I've seen that with working with all these women that I do, that guilt, they really struggle when it comes to their children to let it go. And like I tell them, as a child of an alcoholic, my mother did not sober up till I was 21. And I can honestly say she was completely forgiven. We were just so excited to have our mom back. So, she would say, do you have any resentment? We're like, no, we really didn't. And I try to tell, people, your kids are really, they're your easiest ones, because for the most part, they're going to forgive you, unless my mother was not a mean woman, so there wasn't any of that kind of stuff. She just was emotionally unavailable because she was always loopy or passed out. So, so I think it's just, there's so many situations, like you're saying, with the domestic violence. I think it really depends on what that person went through, because if they do have PTSD or things, sometimes that can really be triggered. And even though there's decades, if they haven't really worked through it and moved on, I think it could be a huge trigger. That could be sometimes, maybe the book stops then because it's too painful. So I would encourage writers to, if you are going to write something heavy emotional, make sure that you are at least healthy enough and detached enough that you can get through your book, and be able to give that wisdom that you have, but without getting so broken up again that you can't finish.
And care for yourself. Yeah.
Right.
You've got a new book out, Lisa. Can you tell us what's the title and what's it about, and how did it come about?
So this one is Pray, Trust, Ride, Lessons on Surrender from a Cowgirl and a King. I am a cowgirl. I like to go on cattle drives because I love horses, and I live in Dayton, Ohio, and we don't have a lot of horse country here. So I like the Western kind of riding. So I go out to Montana and Wyoming, and I've been going on cattle drives just because I grew up with a horse. And that is the one thing I think I've connected with probably better than people, is this horse was my one true love. I think I really love my horse. And so I didn't want to give that up completely. After my sons were raised and all that, I thought, I need to reconnect with that. And so I went out west and I found this ranch that was a real working ranch, and they needed help in this coalition of ranchers. And so that sort of started I didn't know I was going to write about that, because that was probably, 5-6 years ago. And then I went to several other ranches, and then the story started to come, because when you're on the horse, there are times when I literally had to let go of the reins. And the book opens with this particular ride that I had as a child at 15 in this vicious thunderstorm. And it was so scary. So I knew my horse would get us back. I had to hunker down because I was blinded by the sheets of rain. And so I literally let go of the rein and just, gave him a nudge, and we flew home. So, with all of the stuff that's been going on in the world the last couple of years, and there's a lot of fear and anxiety. And I said, this letting go concept is huge in recovery. We have to let go and let God, find your higher power. And so I wanted to marry the two things that I love the most, is God and horses. And so that's what I put together in this book. And I think people like the lure of the West. And this was a real cowboy experience. It was not a dude ranch. We worked long days. In fact, there was one quick funny story because it was June. I went in June, and June is usually a warm month here in the States. And so I'm up in the mountains, though, I think 8,000 elevation or something like that. And I'm in this cozy little cabin. I open the door. It's like 4 a.m. because we were doing a big ride and helping other ranchers that day. And there are huge snowflakes. They are wet and the wind is blowing. It's howling like a blizzard. And I slam the door and I think, oh, there's no way. I don't have to do this. And I'm going to go back to bed. And then I was like, nope, you came out here to help these ranchers. You're going to cowgirl up and get dressed and go. Well, I go down to the barn and there were 2 other cowboys, and these were hard riding, hard drinking cowboys. And I get down and it's my horse, because they leave him out in these big pastures and then they go round him up in the morning. My horse was not in the barn or in the corral area. And I said, well, where's my horse? Well, they didn't think Miss Suburbia would get out of bed. And, so they had to go get my horse, because I'm like, no, I'm going. And it was like a 10-hour day, maybe longer. It was freezing. It was miserable. But I did it, and some of those stories are now in the book, because I had to draw on my inner strength. There were rushing rivers that I didn't want to cross, and I had to let go of the reins because it was steep going down, steep coming up. And I thought, this horse doesn't need my help. And, some of it was a little scary. I had no clue what I was getting myself into. So it was interesting, to say the least.
Sounds like an amazing metaphor for life.
Well, I think it is. And then I put that around the prayer of Jehoshaphat that's in 2 Chronicles, because, when he was there, the people of Judah and all these armies are encroaching on them. Well, his plan was, we're going to pray. And so I say, the people must have thought, what kind of a king doesn't have a battle plan? Instead, he has a prayer plan, right? That was his plan. And so he just told him, we have to let go, right? And we're going to let God, we're going to pray. And it all worked out. So I thought that's perfect for this metaphor of literally, and that's why I wanted to give people the visual, literally, of letting go of the reins. That's what we need to do in life, because people, I think, really want to control and micromanage everything. And that just causes more anxiety and stress.
So, Lisa, we're hearing how your life and your journey of faith and your relationship with God is driving a lot, or going into the books, and the stories are going into the books. But has the writing process itself had an impact on your faith and relationship with God?
Yes, but here again, I think it's been I almost feel like maybe I'm the one who's adversarial, because I'm mad at him most of the time. I really am. I'm just, like I said, if I don't want to write, I feel drawn back to it. And then I'm like, here we go. Or, and the waiting and like I said, those first 4 books, like, what am I doing? I would sit there with friends. I would think, I must be nuts. Is this normal? Because people were like, especially when my kids were little, they're, well, aren't you coming out? Or like, no, I'm gonna write, and maybe because I was sober too, that was, maybe God gave me that, because it was an outlet for me and it gave me an excuse to not go do other things. So it's been complex for me. I don't think it's been a black and white issue. And then, like I said, I feel like I've been in these droughts, like, well, what is this all about? And I think I did see a little light sunshine though with Raising the Bottom, because I know it did touch people. And I know from social media, when I got lots of messages and people, and one woman got sober, she found it in a library in Tennessee. And so when I would hear these, and I'm like, well, this is good. If you save one life, it's worth it. But here I am talking to you ladies. So, I'm sure there's other writers that are like, what am I doing? And I think, you know what, if it's in you and you want to write, just keep writing, because if nothing else, it is like someone said earlier, it's very cathartic, and people do heal, I think, through stories.
Yeah. And I think you've basically touched on what it is to be a grace writer, changing popular culture through your work and wanting to help people. And God has given you a very strong message. And we just really want to thank you for joining us and sharing that. And doing what you're doing obediently, if not necessarily always agreeing with it, but you are obedient to the call to write. And so thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Lisa, where can people find you online?
I'm on Twitter at L Boucher Author. I'm on Facebook, Lisa Boucher, and my website is lisaboucherauthor.com.
Excellent. And we'll put links to those on the website at gracewriters.com. How about I pray for you and the Grace Writers, Lisa?
Thank you. Yes.
Heavenly Father, we thank you so much for Lisa, for the rich and often difficult life that she has led, and yet the way that you have always been there and present, and you are redeeming the difficult times and empowering the good times, and you are bringing a message of truth and hope out of that. I pray that you will bless Lisa as she goes on to continue writing. And I pray for all the other grace writers out there who are wondering, who sometimes think they're kidding themselves, that they're not really a writer, or there's all kinds of rules and regulations that are being pushed upon them. We pray that you will give them freedom and open up the way for them to write in the unique way that you have designed them to write. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
Lisa Boucher, thank you so much for joining us today. Wonderful stories. Donita Bundy, thank you, and Alison Joy. I'm Belinda Pollard, and we will see you next time on the Gracewriters Podcast. Gracewriters is run by volunteers, and we're incredibly grateful to those who have contributed financially to help keep this ministry running. Thank you so very much. If you have enjoyed this podcast and you'd like to help, please go to gracewriters.com and look for Donate in the menu. Continue today's conversation in our free online forum and find useful articles, links and resources at gracewriters.com.